In my series on building better worlds, if you've watched the videos, I talked about liberal bystanding that the authors explain in the introduction, and against which they are mobilizing the political education as filtered through the experiences of the Zapatistas. So I thought I should take a few moments to further elaborate on liberal bystanding, what it is, its dangers, and share some examples about it with you. So here we go. Now, the authors of Building Better Worlds are deriving their knowledge about liberal bystanders from this book by Mary Watkins and Helene Schulman. And they cite certain parts of the book, but the way the authors of this book discuss the liberal bystander or the liberal bystanding subject is in terms of the construction of their identity and certain things that they inhabit or display. And some of those qualities are self-centeredness, virtue signaling, award cultures, attention-seeking behavior, and self-promotion. Now let's think about these. Self-centeredness. So we have a human subject whose idea of the world or thinking of the world is guided by the principle of what's in it for me. And they are trained, or they have internalized this idea that at all costs they will look at the world and deal with it from the point of view of self-interest. If that is what guides their actions, then as long as their self-interest is served, it will not matter to them how their actions impact other people's lives and how they might not be helping the good in this world. Virtue signaling is pretty easy. We see it all the time. A lot of liberal people would tell us, oh, I'm against racism, I'm against sexism, right? A kind of tokenization of the minorities without doing much to change things actively. Self-seeking or seeking self-promotion, that also is pretty evident in the actions of people who are liberal bystanders, because they will latch on to anything that can help them promote themselves. And then constant drawing attention to themselves, pointing out how cool they are. All of these things are what Watson and Schulman consider prime attributes of a liberal bystanding subject. Now, they also list other attributes, but the authors of Building Better Worlds use about 4 or 5 of them. Now, there are consequences of liberal bystander stances in life. So some consequences are personal. If a person is just seeking self-recognition at all costs, no matter how many people they trample on their way, then they also suffer from a kind of alienation. They are disconnected from the world. They might succeed materially, but emotionally they are damaged, and it causes alienation and depression. Now, this can also be understood within the context of modernity. Right? Modernity focuses mostly on isolated selves, nuclear families. It disrupts the larger social structures in which we existed. Early capitalism relies on that by severing people from their social connections so that they can be easily used within the machine of capital. You can see that in modern literature. The ideal subject of a modern literature may be Ulysses or Sun Also Rises is the individual at odds with society, and we are privy to what's going on in their mind. That's why modern literature is solipsistic. It's characters just looking at themselves and not thinking about what's happening in the world, right? They're obsessed with it. That is why Lukács, in one of his essays, privileges realistic literature over modern literature. So the liberal bystander then, personally, in personal terms, is a traumatized subject, is a depressed subject, is an anxious subject. And then there are social costs to having liberal bystander identity, because if you're a liberal bystander, you will pay lip service to injustices, but you will continue seeking your own self-interest even at the cost of others around you. And you will not feel connected to a community. And you will not be working towards the betterment of a community because you have somehow internalized this idea that working for yourself is somehow in the community's best interest. On a smaller scale, in my own experience while working in a department, 99% of whose faculty members were probably liberals and considered themselves liberal. When people like me and others were being targeted by certain powerful people in the department, were being isolated or gaslighted, majority of our colleagues, and some of them especially whose interest was connected to those people, never spoke in favor of us, never challenged the wrong that was being obviously committed. They actually ended up supporting the very people who were trying to hurt the careers of those of us who had raised questions and shared our concerns. Now, if you looked at their published work, these people were deeply liberal. They talked about rights of gay and lesbian people. They talked about race and minorities. If you read their work, you would assume that they were somehow your natural allies. But since they were self-centered and they were focused upon their own careers, and they had aligned themselves with people in the department who could advance their careers, when it came time for them to choose to take a side or at least speak in solidarity with people like me and others, they chose silence. And that is a perfect example of liberal bystanding within a given department or a workplace. Now, on a larger scale, liberal bystanding, we can see it in so many different ways. For example, each one of us is guilty of that. We consider ourselves consumers, and so many times, even in our everyday choices, we knowingly will support a business or purchase something that we know involves exploitation of other human beings. That is one good example of liberal bystanding. On a larger scale, if you look at United States, the elections right now, so there is the Republican Party, there is the Democratic Party. Democrats tend to be liberal. But majority of these liberal people right now will attack you if you criticize the President of the United States, who's a Democrat. If you criticize him for his policies, I've done that for his policies on Gaza, and you will get attacked. So these liberal people, since their political interest as a group even is connected to this party and this person, they themselves are silencing dissent. So what are they basically saying? That, okay, under this president, maybe the Israelis have killed tens of thousands of Palestinian children and women, but you ought to not say anything about it because it weakens him as a candidate and then Trump would win, right? Now that is liberal bystanding at the highest level, because instead of taking a moral stance for the people who are being killed, starved, and oppressed, they are seeking, maybe collective, but their political interest. Liberal bystanding also is kind of what Freire calls false charity. So these would be the people who will give their crumbs here and there, but will not actively get involved in actually collectively coming together to change the system and making it less exploitative and more just. So overall then, liberal bystanding in a way is more dangerous than the right-wing conservatives and others, because that we can tell apart because of their intolerance, right, and because of their obvious racisms and sexisms. With liberal bystanders, the problem is that you get an illusion of care. But deep down, when it comes to asking the hard questions of a system or forcing a system to change, they see it as a disturbance of the equilibrium, as a disturbance of the status quo. And you then become a person who's the troublemaker, who is a problem. That's what happened to me in the example that I gave you about my previous experience at my job, but that happens on a larger scale in politics too, where people who are slightly left of the center, who might want social change or social justice, are seen as a threat to the liberal status quo. So overall, building better worlds then is teaching us through Watkins and Shulman's work as to what liberal bystanding is, what are its consequences individually for the people, but also what are its social consequences, because it severs people from a social function or social activism or from social change, and then they are offering this radical political education, political mode of thinking as informed by the praxis of the Zapatista movement, so that you, me, and everyone else can develop the kind of political and social subjectivities that are not liberal bystanders, but that actually connect with other people. Think not of our own selves, but others around us and the planet itself, and then collectively in our own areas, wherever we are, come together to change the world. So that's what is at stake when we talk about liberal bystanders and liberal bystanding. That's all I wanted to share today. Please let me know what you think. If you have had any such experiences, please do share. I'll be grateful for that. Thank you so much. Stay safe, take care, help each other, and I will now see you next time. Until then, peace and love.